Good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of Up the Ante Mumbai. We are very, very grateful for all of you, to have come for our episode today. Before I sort of start the discussion, I will, briefly introduce the conversation series for people who are joining us for the first time. And then, of course, introduce our speaker and our episode. So allow me to do the same. Up the Ante as a conversation series we had conceptualized as a team last year. And honestly, the idea sort of began as inhabitants of this city, as law and policy researchers who live in this city. When we saw those signs which said Mumbai is upgrading around us, we wanted to sort of unpack what that word upgrading meant. Um, what are the costs behind that upgrading that's happening to the city? Are the benefits of that upgrading sort of equally divided for all our citizens, etc.? Do people even want the city to upgrade? And exactly what does that word mean? I mean, honestly, that sort of curiosity led us to conceptualizing this series. We initially thought of it as a concept. I mean, legally, we thought of it as a concept which said right to the city, and we wanted to understand what right to the city means. A city as a common good. If you're living in the city, what do you mean when you say you have a right to live in the city? You have right to clean air in the city. You have right to clean water or like sanitized streets in the city. So that's how, as law and policy researchers, we sort of conceptualize the conversation series. The other thing that we thought about while doing this conversation series is that we wanted to make it as accessible to people as possible. So instead of doing an academic paper or a report, which then goes up on our website, etc., and which nowadays people have short attention spans, people do not end up reading. We said, why don't we actually engage with people directly by way of this conversation series? And we said we'll invite one expert speaker every few months to have like targeted discussions on certain topics, and we will learn from this expert speaker and also engage with common citizens, students, etc. as well. So that's the overall idea behind this conversation series. We've managed to do with great difficulty 4 episodes so far. I mean, there's always other work that takes priority, but we ensure that at least every couple of months, 2 3 months, we do one episode. In the last 4 episodes that we've done, we've spoken about a bunch of things. We've spoken about infrastructure projects versus, sustainability in the city. We've spoken about how, informal settlements in the city, how are they sort of treated? What is the city's relationship with its so-called slums? We've spoken about how youth in the city can shape the way the city is developing around them. And I think in our last episode, we spoke about the dearth of open spaces in the city and what are the law and policy reforms needed to sort of regulate these open spaces. So those have been largely our conversations so far. For this 5th episode, we have a very distinguished speaker with us today, Dr. Ramnath Jha. He doesn't need much of an introduction, but I'll read out a bit of his profile and then we can sort of start the discussion. We'll do like a 45-minute, 50-minute discussion and then we'll have time for audience questions. So that's how we'll structure it. So I'll also introduce myself. I'm Janali. I am a senior resident fellow at Vidhi and I have with me Prerna on the stage today. Prerna will be also in discussion with Dr. Jha. So Dr. Jha actually, works on urbanization, urban sustainability, urban governance and planning. He's from the 1977 batch of the IAS. And he's worked as a municipal administrator in Pandharpur and Solapur, the collector in Ahmednagar, the municipal commissioner in Pune, and the metropolitan commissioner at the MMRDA. So very illustrious career. He was also the regional advisor South Asia for the urban management program at UN Habitat, the VS and MD at MSRDC, and the principal secretary transport and ports in the Maharashtra government. After taking voluntary retirement in 2008, he worked in the private sector as a CEO and MD at the KADE Economic Infrastructure Private Limited. And in 2015, he led the Mumbai team for preparing the development plan of Mumbai 2034. We'll be asking him questions about that today as well. He also worked as an advisor for the Mumbai Parking Authority, the chairman of the Mumbai Heritage Conservation Committee, the chairman of the Bike Taxi Committee, the chairman of the Mumbai High Rise Committee and member of the Committee on Transparency, Accountability and Efficiency in Urban Local Bodies, something that's at the heart of our discussion today. He is currently a distinguished fellow at ORF and an honorable fellow of the Indian School of Political Economy, member of the advisory board at Symbiosis School of Architecture, and also member of the governing council at Janwani, as well as the Center for Water and Sanitation at SET University, Ahmedabad. Dr. Jha has written, of course, more than 200 papers on ORF on a variety of urban planning, development, governance subjects. And he's written two books towards people-friendly studies published by UNICEF and urban essays published by Yashada. So, Dr. Jha, welcome. We are very happy to have you here today. We have, of course, a lot of questions to ask you. Our participants have also registered a bunch of questions that they'd like to ask you. But because we are, of course, limited on time, Prerna and me have divided this entire discussion into four themes that we'd like to explore with you today. The first theme that we'd like to explore with you today, given the impending urban local body elections, which is looming large, I mean, it's everywhere, and that's what we are all going to be speaking about in the next 2 months. The first theme is going to focus on the overall functioning of urban local bodies. So that's the first theme and the first set of questions we'd like to ask you today. The second theme is actually on inclusive urban planning and development. The third theme is citizen participation and governance, and the fourth theme is urban livability. So these are the four themes, and then we have some questions and sub questions with you for you. So on the first theme, my question to you is that the 74th constitutional amendment inserted in 1992 was inserted to strengthen urban local bodies and ensure that there was transparency in their functioning. So the statement of objects and reasons of that amendment basically said that it's looking to cure some defects. And the defects were that it wanted to address the fact that local bodies were not holding regular elections, that there were prolonged suppressions of these local bodies by the state government, and then there was, of course, inadequate devolution of powers to these local bodies. So this is what the 74th Amendment tried doing. I have two questions for you on this. The first question is, and this is actually for the benefit of some members of the audience who may not come from a legal background. So, firstly, could you please briefly explain to us what this amendment tried doing, and also whether in these 30 over 30 years, etc., whether that amendment has been successful in achieving its objectives? That's my first question.
Firstly, thanks for inviting me. So thank you for inviting me and for allowing me to speak to an audience in Mumbai. I have not had many opportunities of speaking to people, although when you're in government, you're always speaking to people, but from a different point of view. The question that you've asked about the 74th constitutional amendment, and you mentioned the statement of objectives and the reasons. The basic objective of the 74th constitutional amendment was to rescue urban local bodies, ULBs, from the state. States were holding cities in tight embrace. They did not have freedom, and therefore they were not allowed to flower as self-governing institutions. And one of the reasons, of course, was that for long times they were superseded. Regular elections were not held, and as a consequence of which, the independent functioning of the local bodies did not happen. So that was the overall objective. One needs to remember that the 74th constitutional amendment was an afterthought. The real focus of the government was on the 73rd constitutional amendment because they wanted to bring grassroots democracy to the villages. And they had this idea which they ensconced in that 73rd constitutional amendment, the idea of the Gram Sabha, where every adult member who was a voter, registered as a voter in the village, could attend the Gram Sabha, and all policy decisions in regard to the village were taken in that Gram Sabha, and whatever the Gram Sabha decided was sacrosanct and mandatory to be followed by the executive body of the village. They suddenly realized that while they were working on the 74th constitutional amendment, there were also local bodies in the cities. What do we do with them? And the 74th constitutional amendment was a consequence of that realization that we cannot leave out the ULBs out of the total gamut of decentralization that they were thinking. And hence the 74th constitutional amendment was born. There was an earlier draft to the 74th constitutional amendment which was much more potent and did not have a role for members of parliament and members of legislative assemblies, because the idea was that there should be independent governing institutions. However, that happened to be shot down. It did not receive much support from the parliamentarians, and then they had to come up with a whittled down 74th constitutional amendment provisions, which ultimately saw the light of the day. So that was the overall objective of the 74th constitutional amendment. The question therefore arises is that now it's more than 30 years. What has been the impact of the 74th constitutional amendment in terms of governance and overall reforms at the urban local body level? Uh, so on the one hand, the 74th constitutional amendment started with very lofty ideals of having self-governing institutions at the local bodies. But in actuality, the impact has been very poor. And we can see that in the kind of cities that have grown since then and the kind of governance mechanisms that today persist in the urban local bodies. To be fair to the 74th constitutional amendment, let's enumerate some of the positives that came out of that. So the first positive that happened was that the 74th constitutional amendment promised and mandated that the local bodies will have a life of 5 years. That was mandated. You could not supersede the local body, and if for some very serious reasons it was necessary for the state to supersede it, then within 6 months elections must be held and the body should be brought back into existence. So that was one mandatory provision that was made in the urban local body 74th constitutional amendment. The second was that it imported political equity into the provisions, meaning that the weaker sections got representation, which was not earlier mandated. So scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and the other weaker sections, they got representation in the urban local bodies. And this was also extended to the presidents and the mayors, because there also this kind of a formula was introduced. The most important and celebrated aspect was the gender reservation that came in. So the gender equity aspect, which was not there earlier, that was brought into play. And as a result of which, there was a complete revolution as far as the representation of women in urban local bodies is concerned. Earlier, it was 33%. Many of the states then went ahead and made it 50%. So you would find many local bodies where women representation is more than 50%, because some of the very bright ones are able to win elections even in non-reserved seats. So their contribution, there are studies made, and their contribution has been seen to be uh, quite at par with men, and sometimes in certain areas their performance has exceeded the performance of men. So these were some of the positives. The other area that they tried to tackle was bringing up the state election commission. And the idea was that just as we had an election commission at the national level, the state election commission would be an independent body which will conduct elections free from governmental interference. The other body that they created was the State Finance Commission, essentially to advise municipal corporations as well as the village bodies to look at the functions of the municipal bodies, look at their finances, and then recommend what kind of revenue transfer should happen to the local body. So these were reasonably good provisions that were made. However, the crux of the matter was that if you wanted it to be independent of the state, then there was a domain of functions and finances, which was also to be determined. And if it had been made mandatory, that would have given them real life and independent life to the urban local bodies. Uh, the weakness that the 74th constitutional amendment made was, and as lawyers you would understand it more than me, was wherever they wanted things to be mandatory, they used the word shall. And wherever they did not want it to be mandatory, they used the word may, which was an enough provocation for the state to use it as a ploy to not hand over functions and finances independent of what they wanted to the urban local bodies. And that is what has really damaged the image of the 74th constitutional amendment as well as the impact that it could have on urban local bodies. Uh, and in these two areas, a further impactful, significant things that have happened are two. One, the general services tax came about in around 2014, which more or less completely demolished the financial base of the municipal corporations. Effectively speaking, there is only property tax that now remains as a tax for the municipal body. Most of the others have been taken away. Octroi has been abolished. And the Land Acquisition Act, which was also passed around the same time in 2013, which said that in urban areas, the rate of the land would be twice the ready reckoner rate. Now, these became huge burdens for municipal bodies because, the development plan requires the acquisition of land for various amenities. And to quote the development plan of Mumbai, the total bill for acquisition of land in 2034 DP is to the tune of around 2000 to around 14.15 lakh crores at 2013-14 prices. So even if the entire budget for 20 years were put for the acquisition of land, the Mumbai Municipal Corporation would not be able to acquire those lands. So that weakened the municipal corporations all over the country. And the GST, of course, took the financial base away. There were recommendations by the commissions and the finance commission, central finance commissions, that a percentage of GST must be transferred directly to the municipal bodies. That has as yet not happened. So uh, the municipal bodies are batting on a very weak wicket as far as finances are concerned. The same goes for functions because uh, functions can be taken away by the municipal body or handed over. And functions really do not mean much if they are not backed by finances, because what is the point in giving an unfunded mandate? There is a mandate, but there is no fund to implement the mandate. Overall, because of this, the urban local bodies are some of the weakest bodies around the globe in India. I think we compare to only some of the sub-Saharan countries, but most of the developed countries have a base, financial base, which is much better than what is for our urban local bodies. Of course, the government of India is bringing in a lot of schemes and pumping money. Uh, that is keeping the ULBs alive. But the main role of the state government comes in because they are essentially state creatures, and therefore the states have to look after the urban local bodies. Unfortunately, the states themselves are not in very in the pink of financial health. And so the kind of help that they can give to the urban local bodies is an indeterminate kind of a factor. So that's overall the situation as far as the 74th constitutional amendment is concerned. It started with a bang, and unfortunately, at the moment, it seems to be in a whimper.
Thank you so much, sir. So, one follow-up question. I mean, I also have another question on this, but because you've also spoken about the fact that financial strength is a big deal, of course. I mean, if you even if you devolve the functions, if you don't have the money to do it, doesn't make sense. But I mean, we are a stone's throw away from the BMC headquarters, and the general narrative is it's one of the richest municipal corporations in the world. You know, its budget is perhaps bigger than some of the smaller states in India. Would you say that's true? The problems that you've identified are true even for a corporation like the BMC? Do you think its hands are tied as well, given the fact that it has such a huge budget?
I, since I worked with the BMC for almost a decade, and I had interest in finances, although that was not my subject, but I tried and studied some of it. You would remember that in 2011, there was a report by Mrs. Ahluwalia in the what was called HPEC, High Powered uh, Committee, Expert Committee, which went into the financials of the municipal corporations, and they picked up some 8 to 10 important functions, found out what would be the funding required for carrying those out, and found that the municipal corporations around the country did not have that kind of money. And this was only about 8 major functions. The Municipal Corporation of Mumbai, for instance, performs many more functions. And you particularly asked whether what you're saying also applies to a very rich corporation like the Mumbai Corporation. So if you actually calculate the richness of a city, it has to be based on a number of factors. One, what's the area that it governs? Two, what is the population that it looks after? And three, what are the functions that it performs? Because it needs to spread its money over to all those functions in the geographical area and people who are there. Uh, the study that I did established from my point of view that most of the municipal corporations uh, do not have more than 1/3 of the money that they require to do their normal functions at the level at which they are required to function. You know, the Ministry of Urban Development has set benchmarks at which the service needs to be provided. So most of the municipal corporations could be, some of them could be even worse, but no one has money which is beyond 1/3 of the uh, of the money that it requires. And when I'm saying 1/3, I'm always coming back to the implementation of the development plan, because our cities are growing. So it is not merely the question of provision of infrastructures, but also provision of the kinds of amenities that are required and are provided in the development plan. So if you were to implement the development plan in 20 years, I've calculated the 1/20th of that money in every annual budget that needs to come. So if you calculate both those, the normal functioning as well as the implementation of the DP, then it is around 1/3 of the budget that is required for the city. Remember, as far as I'm concerned, I consider the DP as the urban livability index. The less DP you implement, the urban livability is going to go down because the amenities are not going to be there as per the population that your city has.
Understood, sir. Understood. Sir, would love to talk to you separately about this because the general narrative is that it's such a rich corporation, but look at the city around us. But you're saying that as per your study, even the BMC, the funds are 1/3 of what they actually need to implement the DP. So the next question that I have, and this is again coming back to the kind of reforms that are needed. So there are, of course, like you mentioned, some positives out of the 74th constitutional amendment.
There was one other negative which I forgot to mention, and that's on governance. There are several issues such as the kind of governance machinery that the architecture that they would exist. Uh, how is the city going to be led? Who is going to be its chief executive? How is he going to get elected? These are very important questions. How transparency and accountability can be brought in and injected into the urban local bodies. These aspects were totally ignored in the 74th Constitutional Amendment.
Yes, sir. So, sir, there are problems, and I think like we have three, four of them that you just identified, along with the positives. One is the financial strength, the second is devolution of functions being inadequate. The third is this mandatory versus discretionary language in the amendment, and the fourth is the governance architecture, which we've not paid enough attention to. Now, if this is the scope of the problems that is there in front of us, the question is now if we have to improve and if we actually have to work towards the objective of strengthening our urban local bodies, who is best placed to make these reforms? Should we then revisit Part 9A of the Indian Constitution and see if it needs to be revisited? Some of the languages need to be amended. Do we need to amend it again? Or do you think that there is enough in that part and perhaps states are now best placed to push those kind of reforms? And specifically for a state like Maharashtra, which is one of the it's one of the highest urbanized states in the country, what are the kind of legal and policy reforms that are needed at the state level uh, to sort of strengthen our urban local bodies and ensure transparency in their functioning? Or perhaps you can tell me that, Shinari, it's not the states, maybe the push needs to come from the center.
Well, we had an opportunity in the constitutional amendment that we did, and we missed that opportunity. So, if we were to do it at the national level, then obviously there needs to be a second round of constitutional amendment that happens. And it needs to be properly studied. Don't link it with the village because rural decentralization is a different cup of tea. Urbanization is much more complex, and there are many other things that need to go into any kind of amendment that we do. So that is something that is the need of the hour. However, whenever we discuss this in gatherings, the main question that arises is are two. One, the kind of uh, the kind of mandate the parliament needs to pass a constitutional amendment of this order. Do we have that kind of a majority at the national level in the parliament to pass this kind of a legislation? Because essentially it is a question of transferring power from the state to the cities. So if the country is to step into that, then there are going to be objections, there are going to be pressures that will come because power is not something. It's innate nature of power not to share it. So you acquire more of it and keep it to yourself. You don't share it. So as soon as that comes up, there are going to be objections, etc., placed from different quarters. But that would be the best thing because then it would be applicable to the entire country and to all urban local bodies in the country. However, nothing prevents the states to do it because, after all, urban local bodies under the constitution are creatures of the state. There, I'm uh, placing an idea that is going to have backlashes. I feel that the very large cities, that have gone beyond 5 million, what we call mega cities, we need to look at their governance mechanism differently, whether they still need to be with the states or whether at that level they should be taken over by the center is a question that needs to be discussed because they become very important economic entities and have an impact on how the nation fares. So once a city rises to national importance, how do you deal with it is something that's a question that needs to be debated. As far as the others are concerned, I think nothing prevents the states from carrying out devolution of powers, decentralize them to the urban local bodies. Uh, that is only a statutory function, and those statutes can be passed at the state level. And from that point of view, the transparency committee that you talked of, uh, that's a report that goes into all these aspects. And I think it was quite comprehensive in the recommendations that it made, even on citizens' participation, where it came up with the idea of the Jan Sabha. So that's something that is available. It's in the public domain, and I think citizens should have a close look at it.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Jha. We'll move on to our second theme. Prerna will be asking you the question. The second theme is on inclusive urban planning and development.
So I'd like to delve a little more into the development plans that you were talking about. When you talk about the TP, I specifically want to ask you about the Mumbai Development Plan 2034. You led the committee that revised it, and this plan was to span from 2014 to 2034. And it was noted especially because it was the first urban DP to have an entire chapter dedicated to gender inclusivity and was quite keen on focusing on the voices of women and other marginalized groups. Now that we are at the halfway point of this intended term, I just want to know how you feel that we fared so far, and what pain points do you think we should be focusing on further?
So as far as provisions for women are concerned, this was the first time that this question was taken up seriously. And I must admit that part of the work that was done in the DP was on account of gender bodies that are there in the city. A number of voluntary organizations contributed to that, and there are specific seven kinds of amenities that have been put: the multi-purpose housing, uh, then the care centers. Uh, there are seven of them. I forget the names of all of them, but it's quite comprehensive. Part of it was taken up for construction because some of the hostels, for instance, needed construction. I, the latest that I know is that one of those are already functional, and there are one or two others that are under construction. Uh, the idea of having women specific toilets designed separately, which was considered very important by several groups, that has also been taken to a certain extent. But most of them uh, have not seen much of fruition. And as I mentioned, the TP needs implementation. And the average implementation all over the country as far as DP is concerned is about 15 to 20%. And one of the main reasons is that DP implementation both requires concentration, budgetary provision, as well as a lot of land acquisition. So those are the drawbacks as far as implementing the DP is concerned. My role, of course, in the DP was limited because the DP had already been made, and the time frame had already started elapsing. So the idea was that you quickly revise it and come up with a revised plan, which we did in about 1 year's time. But it is something that groups have tried to introduce in other municipal bodies. They also have taken it to the government of India, but very slow progress has been made in this direction, mainly because the urban local bodies are weak institutions.
Yes, sir. I also want to touch on the point where you were talking about the lack of funds. When it comes to an urban local body, though you mentioned that there are schemes and that's a way to access these funds, I wonder if perhaps the limitation on the own source resources is a hamper to sort of customizing these development plans to meet the needs that are coming up in these consultations with marginalized groups.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the own source money is the only money which is untied money. Otherwise, government of India's monies that come in for smart cities or for other programs are for specific purposes, and you have to your path is very strictly followed, which has already been given by the others. So you just have to follow that. So you cannot use those monies for other purposes, whereas your own source is limited. So if you have any innovative ideas, the idea gets restricted by the money flow that you yourself have.
Thank you, sir. Janali will move on to our next theme.
So the next, so we've spoken about development planning. I think moving on to governance, which you briefly touched upon in your previous answer as well. So my question was that it seems when you look at our statutory legislative framework, there are multiple institutional arrangements in place to ensure that the citizen voice is represented within the urban local governance setup. So, of course, you are represented by your corporators or councillors in an urban local body. They are sometimes, I mean, they are a part of the ward committee. Sometimes you also have civil society representation in these ward committees. Then there is the concept of an area sabha, which, although introduced under our laws, I don't think the provision was ever implemented. Then there is, of course, the advanced locality management, ALMs. That's also one of the ways in which citizens can participate in the day-to-day governance of their city as well as their neighborhoods. If this is the case, which is that there are some institutional arrangements in place, why do citizens still feel distant in terms of how their city is governed or how their immediate neighborhoods are governed? We still feel very, very distant in terms of what's happening in our immediate neighborhoods, and you feel that constant dissonance. And I think as a city in Bombay, especially having lived here for so many years, so after a point, you just want to move ahead with life and get on with your work and not worry too much. But I mean, it's impossible not to look at your neighborhoods and worry about what's happening. So my question to you is that what sort of reforms are needed in our legislative framework, or even maybe not a legal amendment like our policy frameworks, to ensure that the citizen voice is more meaningfully represented in our governance? It's not just a mere symbolic gesture that we have XYZ committees or we have ALMs or we have area sabhas, but there is more meaningful engagement that is happening with the citizens in our day-to-day governance.
It's a it's a difficult question because the feelings that you just expressed, they are commonly felt all around the country. You find uh, I have written articles on this, on how the frustration of citizens has come up on the streets in various areas. Uh, whether it is Siliguri, whether it is Guwahati, whether it is Mumbai, whether it is Pune, Bengaluru. Citizens groups have agitated on things that are happening within their city, and their voice is not being heard. So let's admit firstly that uh, we are living in a kind of a democracy which is representative democracy. So the citizens are represented by the corporator, and he is supposed to be the voice of the people. So the direct voice of the people has to reach only as far as the corporator is concerned. From there, he takes it over. We have not gone to the level of participatory democracy, or in the local bodies, direct democracy is possible. We haven't gone that far. Uh, there is a perception among the government officials and functionaries and political bosses that we need to give more space to the citizens. And the idea of the Nagar Raj bill, where the area sabha was mandated, that was done sometime in the when JNNURM was there, and the states were asked that they should pass this bill in their states, and its provision should be mandated as far as the states were concerned. And the monies that flowed out of JNNURM, uh, they were made conditional that this act would also be passed. So since most of the states wanted the money, many of the states passed the Nagar Raj bill and the concept of the area sabha. But they stopped short of implementation. And one of the methods that is used in this is that you pass the bill, but you don't notify it. So if you don't notify it, it doesn't become operational. So it stopped at that level, and I think the government then had to give way to passing on the monies because elections drew near and everyone wants to win. So the whole aspect of making the act mandatory was forgotten for that period. Now, if you look at the provisions of the Area Sabha was a representative body of the citizens where citizens would deliberate and the functions that they would perform, they were listed in that Model Nagar Raj bill. Uh, but if you look at the overall uh, concept, the concept still was advisory. That is, your opinions, advices, etc., was advisory in nature. If the local body wanted to accept them, they would accept. If they did not, then they would reject them. So it was not mandated that the voice of the citizens or their opinions would be obeyed. We took this idea in the Transparency Committee report and we have gone much ahead where the recommendation is that there should be a Jan Sabha and the elections to the Jan Sabha should be held uh, at the booth level. So uh, a group of 4,000, 5,000 people, uh, they would they would be in that booth and the number of voters would be around 3,000, 5,000, and they would then select certain representatives who would be the Jan Sabha. And whatever the Jan Sabha decided in terms of the works that need to be taken up, those works had to be mandated by the Jan Sabha, which the municipal body was bound to implement. So, how much money will come into that particular locality was left to the municipal corporation because it would depend on the overall kitty. But in that kitty, what are the works that would be taken? That would be mandated by the people because they have the best idea of what they need. Uh, the other was that when these works were done, the Jan Sabha would have powers of social audit because they will then see what is the quality of work that is being done. So there was a counter check on the quality of work that was being done. So these are some of the recommendations that have gone into that transparency committee report. Uh, Overall in the country, the situation still is that uh, you form these kinds of bodies like the Advanced Locality Management or the Resident Welfare Association, and these then essentially are doing petitioning to the government that this should be done. And then it is left to the government whether to implement or not to implement. Sometimes the idea may be ludicrous, which is put forth by different citizens groups, and you can see some examples of those uh, when they happen. But the majority of them are those that are in the interest of the people. Some of these ideas will get accepted because then, but it depends on what kind of people are there on the other side who are going to hear you. There is no mandated legislation on this, and I think the only way it can be done is that you will have to have a statutory provision which makes it compulsory, because only then power will be shared. Essentially, it's a question of decision making. So power otherwise does not get shared. Wherever they have these kinds of mechanisms, like we know that in Brazil, similar kind of thing exists where citizens have a much stronger voice. There is a statutory provision that this will be done. So I think we need to move into that direction. And today it is much more easy than what it was earlier because with the kind of technology that is available, social media platforms from which you can give your opinions, uh, it's very easy. But it needs to be channeled through a statutory provision that will mandate that the voice of citizens would be heard and the decisions that they make would be implemented.
Understood. So just digressing a bit, coming to the question of planning, because you were talking about citizen opinion and citizen feedback and how in the day-to-day governance there should be some statutory framework to make it mandatory. The fact that their feedback is considered. Correct me if I'm wrong. Even the Maharashtra Regional and Town Planning Act, the MRTP, which is the basis for all our development plans, citizens can give feedback on the development plans, but that feedback is obviously not mandatory. I mean, I remember reading it a while back, and there was just one provision which said you can send in comments, and there is absolutely no obligation on the government to even respond or acknowledge to those comments, or even to tell you that this is not possible. So, I'm seeing that there is some sort of a distinction now that you've answered the second question, appearing that I feel like planning in our head seems to be a very technocratic sort of exercise. So there is even less citizen involvement in planning. When actually that you should start with citizen involvement, mandatory citizen involvement right from the planning stage. Governance, yes, that comes later. But right from the planning stage, if we have citizen involvement, a lot of the issues that later arise in governance will sort of get resolved. But we don't even do that at the planning stage. I mean, DP 2034 was an exception, and I mean, we all know the original plan was scrapped, and then we had a revised sort of plan coming in, and we do have all of these milestones that happened with that DP. But again, there is no legal obligation on the government to have citizen involvement at the planning stage. Is that correct? Like the analysis, or would you say that the MRTP is fine?
No, no, the MRTP has a provision for suggestions and objections. But suggestions and objections, whether they are going to be accepted or not accepted, it is the hands of the decision makers in the government. So that's not the kind of citizens' participation we are currently talking about. We are talking about citizens' participation where they partake in the decision making process. The question of the crux of the whole thing is decision making. Who decides what I should have? Now, in a city, uh, mostly it should be decided by the people at least what they want. What are the services that they would have? Whether roads are more important, or water is more important, or metro is more important. These are things that in many countries are decided by people. So we need to move to that scale. In the Gram Sabha, this is more or less feasible. But in the urban context, it does not become feasible because of the very large numbers that we have. So essentially, it becomes a fourth layer of representation that is able to filter the ideas and decisions and then place it before the urban local body for implementation. That's the step that we need to take, and that has to come through statutory provisions. As long as it is not there, as I told you, it's a question of decision making, which involves power, and power is a very dear thing for all those who have that power.
Thank you, sir. So, what happens in the situation that we've been facing in Maharashtra for the last few years? Ever since COVID, we've not had elections. There has been an administrator in power, and across multiple municipal corporations, etc., who's been handling the day-to-day business of our cities. Um, my question to you, because I believe you've also been in that role before, that of an administrator. How does an administrator, how do they, he or she, sort of take into account public feedback while governing the city? So that was
Yeah,
out of
again, this
curiosity.
depends on the individual. How much feedback does he want? Because there is nothing which compels him that he must have feedback. He should like to have feedback for the simple reason that the city is a place where you have so much talent. There are people who have worked in different areas, who have worked in the municipal body themselves, and they have ideas. So, if you want a plethora of ideas that should come to you, out of which you can develop a menu and pick out of those, then it is best that you should be able to listen to people and invite suggestions and objections. But then that is an individual judgment. Whoever feels the need will do that. Otherwise, the administrator functions on behalf of the entire municipal corporation and takes decisions because all the powers are vested in the administrator. Even when the municipal body is there, the municipal corporations in India have a very fractured mandate as far as decision making is concerned. Who takes decisions? The municipal commissioner is the chief executive. For financial reasons, he has to go to the standing committee. The mayor is a figurehead who only presides over the general body meetings. So uh, this British pattern that was set has not really been changed. Whereas in the entire developed world, the chief executive is one person who takes decisions, and he is very powerful. We, we just had a election in New York, for instance, and a lot of discussion happened on the mayoral powers. Now, the New York mayor or the London mayor, all these mayors, the chief executive is the mayor. But the question here that arises is leave alone the mayor. If the city itself does not have powers, then the mayor obviously is also a creature of the state. Correct. Similar is the situation in the case of the administrator. He is a creature of the state. So whether it is the elected body or whether it is the administrator, the state remains in the sand.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
The state drives the horse as it wishes.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank Thank you so much, sir. We'll be moving on to our last theme for today, which is urban livability. We have a couple of questions on that theme, and then we will open up the floor for audience questions. Prerna, do you want to go ahead?
So urban livability is a word that you've also said quite a bit in our discussion, and I think it's a topic of conversation around. Um, Maharashtra, according to the 2011 census, is the third most urbanized state. But then there is
It's the third most urbanized state in percentage terms, but it has the largest urban population in the country.
yes, that's right. Um, But the question then is, how do we measure urban livability? You mentioned that you personally think of it as the implementation of the DP. But I wonder, as a layman, what metrics do you think we should be considering in terms of how livable our urban spaces are?
Actually, this brings the whole discussion to the question, according to me, of what is the kind of density that a city can live with? How dense should a city be? And if you compare densities around the world, you will find that India and some South Asian cities, they are the densest because Dhaka here is one of the densest. Mumbai is close to the being the densest with about 30,000 people per square kilometer. Now, if you take the developed world, they are in a different, sailing in a different boat. One, they are losing population. Two, they have always been able to control density even in their major cities. So I was watching, for instance, the figures of New York. They haven't changed over the last 30, 40, 50 years between 6 million and 8 million. Currently, it is 8.5 million. So they have certain mechanisms by which density can be controlled. And this is something which I've studied and I've seen that certain cities passed laws limiting density in certain localities. So they don't have a common density in terms of the entire city, which of course would emerge, but uh, in different you know divisions of the city, uh, they have different kinds of densities that they have prescribed. So uh, when your density goes beyond a certain point, why does it go beyond that certain point? Is a question that we need to ask. Now, essentially, the nature of a city is that its nature is economic, right? A city comes as an economic entity where people gather, and because they gather in large numbers, they can be very productive, and that's where the economic productivity comes in. The nature of the economy is that it tends to agglomerate. So more and more activity is sought to be done in less and less space, and that leads to greater productivity. So this is the principle on which a city would function if you left it without any interventions. Now the question is that while the economy may grow on one hand, it has an impact on livability. So where is the balance to be struck beyond which urban livability is going to go down? Now, we were talking a while back with Mr. Goenka, who is talking about carrying capacity. So, in a way, This is something which is related to that. Although the idea has been picked up from the environmental sciences, it is obvious that if you have a geographical mass and if it has certain functions to do and if it has certain number of people, then it generates resources. And if you use them beyond its capacity of regeneration, then obviously the urban livability is going to go down. So I have not come across any attempt in the Indian context where density has been subject of debate. And I think it's a very important debate if we are going to uh, preserve urban livability in our cities. Mind you, urban economy does not continue to grow even if urban livability goes down. At a certain point, livability starts impacting the economy. And one or two economists like Mr. Kelkar and Pete have written on this that in the last few years, the contribution of cities to India in terms of GDP has got stuck around 62 to 63%, which essentially means that the urban livability factor is now starting to have an impact on the economic angle. So this is something that has to be studied in a very rough kind of a calculation. I would feel that it's a balance between what you build and what you keep as open. So there has to be a balance between the built environment and the open environment. Now there are already standards that have been set. At least India has been following. The MOUD has standards of open spaces, standards of areas that you would leave alone, that you would have, holding ponds, etc. All these ideas are there. They do not get implemented. And one of the primary reasons is that when you do planning, you start with a different kind of a premise. What is the premise? How do we start? Firstly, we see that if I have to do a 2034 plan, what is the population going to be in 2034? Now, population obviously in India is increasing, unlike other places. So the population, if it was to 12.44 million in 2011, it is going to be a little larger. Although the speed at which the city like Mumbai grows now has gone down uh, quite appreciably, but still it is rising. So if your population is going to rise, then you start working out what is the kind of amenities that you need to provide based on the standards that you have adopted. So you could have adopted state standards. In the case of Mumbai, Mumbai has its own standards. So one of the reasons why the plan was scrapped because one of the standards was sought to be diluted, and that was 4 square meters per person of open space, which was sought to be brought down to 2 square meters. Now, the national stipulation is between 10 to 12 meters, square meters per person. Now, if you go by, say, 10 square meters per person, essentially it means that per square kilometer, your population gets frozen at 10,000 people. So that is the population that you need to have. So 10,000 people per square kilometer, if it's a city of 100 square kilometers, will have a population of 10 lakhs. Now, Mumbai is 478 square kilometers, has a population of now around 13 to 14 million. So you can calculate what is the kind of balance that has been maintained between the two. And this is a question everywhere. It is a question in Bengaluru. It's emerging as a huge question in Pune and in most of our very dense cities. So it's a question that needs to be addressed. And if we do not, then urban livability is going to go down in most of the cities. The answer to that is don't pack cities with people, but build many more cities. So China has done a better job, although we don't look very kindly in China for different reasons, and those are good reasons. But as far as this is concerned, the number of cities that they have built is an enormous number. And they are aware of this idea because in Shanghai and Beijing, because they are a totalitarian state, they have thrown out people in millions. because they know that then otherwise the city becomes ungovernable. So this idea is gaining ground and should gain ground. Don't go by what the Western economists say, because if you go to international fora, you will find that density is something which is always talked about. We need to be more dense. So there are two reasons for that. They need more density because they are losing density. So more people need to move into cities where their economies will flourish. In our case, at least till now, we are increasing in population, although there are already talks that our replacement rate has gone down below the actual replacement rate that the country requires. But the impact of that would come later. We are still to urbanize because we are only 35% urbanized, thereabouts today. And every country has moved towards urbanization to the limit of 80%, 85%. So if we have to have that kind of an urbanization, that urbanization needs to be spread out into viable entities across the country and not packed in 10, 12 mega cities. This is an idea that a Mumbaikar gave long time back. Charles Correa's report, the Urbanization Commission report, that talks of 329 growth centers which they had identified where we should put our money into and we should grow them and we should develop their infrastructure and they will become good economies. So it's a very important question which has not been adequately addressed. In many cases, we are working on in the opposite direction. I think it needs to be addressed very seriously.
Thank you, sir. I think that brings us to the end of our structured questions, but maybe we could open it up for audience questions if anyone would like to ask Dr. Jahani.
Thank you, Dr. Jaz. Very interesting presentation. But to start with the financing issue, uh, Mumbai Corporation is also supposed to be one of the most corrupt corporations in the country. And the manner in which projects are being implemented, like the coastal road, the extension of the coastal road, in fact, even the metro itself, uh, in that sense, it seems that the entire emphasis is to cater to the rich people who can afford private cars, who can afford to pay the metro fares, which currently seem to be heavily subsidized. And on the other hand, the BMC and the state government says we don't have money to subsidize the BEST bus service. We don't have money to upgrade the suburban train system, which actually is the lifeline of Mumbai as far as transportation is concerned. And in fact, something like doubling the capacity of the train by increasing the frequency has been talked about since George Fernandez was the railway minister. And the amount required to do that is maybe a fraction of the money that is being spent on metros. So, what would you like to say?
No, I would like to say on this that in cities like Mumbai, I will look at it in a broader perspective. The amount of money that you put into a very large city for doing one infrastructure, in the same amount of money, it is possible to develop another city, right? So when you concentrate money on one city, then that's a planning that is going awry. Of course, Mumbai has to be made to survive because Mumbai is the most important city in the state and in the country as well because it supports about 8% of national GDP. So it's the most important country financially. But if part of that infrastructure is spread around into many other smaller cities, you would have another thriving city in certain years. So I think the overall urbanization policy that a state needs to evolve is extremely important. And that's what we mentioned in the Transparency Committee report that the country needs to come up with an urbanization policy. We still do not have a proper urbanization policy. And the states need to follow suit and need to have their own kind of policy. That is sorely missing. And it's a different job and a different, difficult kind of job. but it needs to be done. There are countries that have these policies that are quite well spelled out, and you can make contributions to those policies. So my view would be that we need to start looking at many more viable economic urban centers where we need to put money in.
So talking about survival of the city, we are faced with rising sea levels, heat island effect, and now
Climate change.
extreme heat events also. And yet nothing seems to be done about it. I mean, one of our previous municipal commissioners is on record saying that 80% of the island cities which are reclaimed will be underwater by the year 2050. And yet the BMC is giving higher FSIs in those areas. The CRZ norms have been relaxed to permit higher FSIs instead of going the other way. So I mean, this is a real kind of perverse decision-making process. And for example, even metros, there are 11 metros being built. Only one of them is underground, and the underground metro is in that part of the city which is supposed to be underwater 20 years from now.
Yeah, climate change is a huge issue which was not addressed earlier because it was not such a big issue. But now, for instance, in the case of Mumbai, floods are there to stay. Every year the city is visited by floods. Same situation is there in many other cities. So climate change is going to have impact, and every city has to deal with it in an increasing manner in the coming years. We are just awakening to it because I think some cities have prepared climate action plans. I have written on this subject, and climate action plans are now there available in Mumbai, Chennai, many other cities. It's such a vexed kind of a situation in cities. As soon as you talk of climate action plan, the climate action plan has certain operational issues that you need to put into place. As soon as you do that, you need money for that. As soon as you talk of money, you say we have no money. So, on the one hand, you don't have money. On the other hand, climate is striking cities more than any other place. And because you have such large populations, the impact that they will have on cities is going to have a ruinous impact on the economy as well. So these are ideas that need to be dealt with. And as citizens, we have to continue talking about it.
So, but there seems to be no shortage of money. If you look at the amount being spent on coastal roads and the metros and so on, and things like MTHL and all, it seems to be that we have more than enough money. But on one hand, and on
No,
the other hand, we don't have money, as you said, to implement DP and so on.
most of these schemes have, as far as Mumbai's contribution is concerned, has come from the kitty that they had saved over years. For instance, I recall for the coastal road, Mumbai Corporation has given an amount of around 10,000 crores. That has not come from their budget. That has come from the savings that they had. But savings are going to run out someday. So if you look at the overall functions that they are supposed to perform and at the level at they're not performing those. For instance, maintenance is a huge function. Now, if you keep on building assets and not maintaining those assets are going to give way. And it's been happening. There have been examples in every city where uh, footbridges have collapsed or something else has collapsed, essentially because you've not maintained them. My stints in corporations have taught me that of your entire budget, about one third must be devoted to maintenance, one third to salaries. If that goes beyond one third, that's a problem, and one third to capital in the current scenario. But if you want more capital, obviously your maintenance will be poor, and that will have repercussions. Yes, sir.
Uh, first of all, the aspirations of people have been raised perhaps in the wrong direction by I don't know who, maybe the politicians. They want to aspire to have whatever we have got in the West. So copy them, beat them. I think that is the aspiration that has been created in the political arena, and therefore I think people also perhaps are looking forward to that kind of thing. We need to change that. How the narrative changes, I don't know. Coming to the density of the cities, I remember when I think 2011, Surbana, the planner from Singapore, I think he had made a plan where the FSI in the Nariman Point area was to be 15, then I think the island city would be 5, and 3 in the suburbs, and 3 in the Navi Mumbai area. So during the argument that was going on, I said that look here, the density as it is of the island city is about 450 persons per hectare. That's about 46,000 persons per square kilometer, one of the highest. And if you take a small area of sea wall, it was touching, I think, 1,100 persons per hectare. So, how do you say that you must have the high FSI where people will come inside, and then I think we'll have all sort of problems. He said that world over, population has come down, the density has come down, and so this will happen in Mumbai also. So I think the perception of these planners many times, they go by what they have experienced elsewhere, not in the third world. Maybe we have to look at Latin America to see the problems and then try and see what solutions they have adopted and what solutions can be applied here. And I think that's where I felt that we must work on.
One of the arguments that is given by those who favor higher FSI is that higher FSI does not lead to larger densities because they provide more living space or working space. So per person, the availability of space increases, but the overall population does not increase. That's the concept on which they have worked. Probably it has worked in their areas. My argument to that is FSI in any case is not going to reduce population. Correct? Population is already there. We have very high densities as high as 1.5 lakh in the slums of Mumbai per square kilometer, which is unbelievable, this kind of a density. So if it is not going to reduce population, why at all have higher FSI? So obviously the higher FSI is meant for conspicuous consumption by the rich, correct? It's not to be, because a city which is as large as Mumbai, that's one of the things that happened is that as cities grow, the land becomes scarce and therefore its price shoots up and it becomes unaffordable not only for the poor but even for the middle classes. So everyone starts getting squeezed. So that argument does not stand in the context of India. I remember when I was doing the 2034 development plan, one of the arguments that was being given and it was being touted by a lot of planners, very important planners around the country, that the transit oriented development that had been planned along the railway lines, which meant building along the railway lines so as to subsidize the metro and increase its fare box by having larger populations. Uh, the argument was this, that it is going to not increase population, it is only going to bring them from the other areas to use metro because they will live close to that, the Hong Kong model that they talked of, and the general population of the city was dead against it. So finally, after hearing the arguments that was given by both sides, and transit-oriented development being the talk of the world currently in urban planning, we had to scrap it. And people were quite, I mean, those who understand archaeology, etc., they were they were very angry with this. Why have you scrapped it? Government of India also has been, advocating transit-oriented development. But given the kind of density we already have in the city, where is the question of, having high-rise buildings along the railway lines in Mumbai? So we had to scrap it. You have to tailor your city to the needs of the people. That's the simple argument ultimately. And that's where the citizens' participation comes in. You have to listen to what people want.
Please go ahead.
Sir, I just want to know like what kind of different approach need to be adopted by the admin for the betterment of the mega city like Mumbai.
For
what kind of different approach should be adopted by the administration to make the city better for the citizens?
This is a very big question because in the day-to-day kind of activities that happen in the city, Mumbai has gone beyond that. Mumbai has many larger questions that it has to address. How do we address those questions is something, and they have long-term impacts on the city.
Then in your,
As I was asked, what about climate change? If the city is going to go underwater, how do we plan to see that the city does not go underwater? There are many cities around the world which are already grappling with these questions.
some of these kind of questions, what do you think, like apart from the climate change, what are the other major things like that GMC should take very
In
seriously?
our case, I think climate change is one, urban livability is another. What is the kind of plan that you should have? How should you implement it? How can you prevent further densification of the city? How can you spread it out in terms of, lands that might come to you? Probably, for instance, when I say of 478 kilometers, there is a large tract of land which will come in Thane Creek because the sea has already deposited a lot of soil there, which will solidify over a period. So the question of survival is more important. I think the economy anyway takes care of itself. As it is, Mumbai's economy is growing more outside Mumbai than in Mumbai now because the neighboring areas in MMR, they are the real areas where boom is taking place. And that's a normal way in which economies function. Cities are very complex. So if you continue to do day-to-day activities without thinking as to what will be the impact 20 years, 30 years hence, then you miss the bus and something comes upon you which you're not now ready to face. Yes, sir. Yes,
Hello,
ma'am.
sir. Yeah. You mentioned the cities are economic entities, and at the same time, you proposed the idea that there should be discussion around if center can overtake the cities which are economically booming or have larger population with the importance is grown. So, how do you think what incentive will be for the states to develop their cities first? And second, uh, do you think that it is a feasible option in the quasi-federal and the state-center relationship that we have in India right now?
No, right now it is not there. It has to be in discussion with people. And when I say they should take over, it doesn't mean that they should physically take over and take them out of the purview of the state. What I mean is that you give a status to a city as an economic entity, which is very important, and then your interest in that city becomes much more pronounced in terms of finance, in terms of policy, because you are dealing with cities at the national level, and therefore it is expected that inputs that would come from you would have a much broader perspective than what the state may be able to provide. So the interest level of the country of the national government must go up in larger cities. We tried it with smaller cities. Earlier there was a scheme called as IDSMT, which was a scheme for small and medium towns. And monies were given to those small and medium towns so that their infrastructure comes up and they become livable. That scheme now has been dropped because the quantum of money that even a small city requires is very large. And India was not prepared to put that money into it. As it is conceptually, India has not been accustomed to thinking of cities. And it has, impacts from the Gandhian era, where cities were considered evil. And this is what Gandhi felt, that cities were evil and they were surviving on the blood of the villagers. So if you see in the first 3 5-year plans of the country, there's hardly a paragraph on cities because cities were supposed to take care of themselves. It was the villages where the poor lived and we had to concentrate, which was okay at that time. But now you tried all that and still people are shifting into cities. So you have not been able to stop the flow of people, although you may have been able to slow it down. And in the future also, urbanization is going to go ahead because it's a force that no country has been able to stop, even if it wanted. China, of course, reversed its idea. China was equally adamant that people should not move to the cities from the villages, and they had this registration system called haiku, where anyone who wanted to move from the city, from the village to the city, had to be registered and only permitted to go into the city. But then they realized in the 80s that if they wanted to become an economy, a powerful economy, the only way they could do is by manufacturing, for which they needed labor. And they needed to bring all these people into cities. So they scrapped their haiku system and allowed people to flow in. So in 1951, their urban percentage was 11, ours was 13. Today we are at 35, they are at 66.
Have any more questions? One. Okay. One over here and then here.
So first of all, thank you so much, sir, for the such an valuable insight on the many things. I have a question about in terms of the participation of individuals in urban spaces. So since I work in a development sector, one of the leading philanthropies across the country, so there is a one issue which we have identified throughout the year, throughout the period of time, is that a lack of a youth participation in terms of decision making, holding institutions accountable. So there are youths, especially in my age, that are not bothered about making institution accountable. Of course, there are multiple reasons, like one which I've mentioned, that last election in India, so in Maharashtra, which we had held urban bodies for 2017. So there is no institution at place that is there. But youth especially are not even in the process to hold the institutions accountable for issues which are in daily need. For example, the sanitation is there, water issues are there. So majority of youths are least bothered about it. So and especially in the NGO sector or development sector, it's largely hit by the issues which are one they get bigger and bigger by that time, because there's a lesser participation of community as a whole. So what do you think about that? What are the ways we can increase the participation of youths, especially identifying the issues nearby the areas?
That brings me actually, it's a very good question that you've asked because it's something which we had, while we were talking about citizens' participation, we did not dwell on that aspect as to why citizens don't participate. Now, studies have revealed that, for instance, whatever participation we have in the form of representative democracy, that is voting, uh, urban local bodies and people living in cities, they are at the bottom as far as interest in elections at the local level is concerned. So the lowest voting percentage that happens is in cities. You will find in every state, take a state or the country, and you will find that villages, the voting percentage is high. State elections, voting percentage is high. Cities, voting percentage is low. In some of the posh areas, the voting percentage is lowest. Gokhale Institute in Pune made a study of Mumbai, and they found that in some of the South Mumbai localities, the voting percentage was less than 30%. And one of the reasons, which is a valid reason that people gave, is that what's the point of voting when your voice does not get heard? Because we don't count. So, one of the things that has happened in cities is that citizens, especially in the middle classes, they don't seem to be counted because one, they do not vote, and two, the issues of others become more important because of the numerical superiority. How do you bring youth to participate in city affairs? It's a difficult question to answer because the young are supposed to build their own careers. So do they go to the municipal office with a flag and say that my area is not going to get water, or do they attend office and see that they can make money for their own family? So it's a struggle. India is not an easy country to survive because we are very too many. Our number is very large. So everyone has to work hard. And when you work hard, finding time from your office work and home work, uh, the need to, you know, have your children go to school, bring him back to school, bring her back to from this place, from a dance school, etc. Because people are engaged in building up their own lives and the lives of their children. That is why the maximum participation in cities is by citizens who have retired because I have worked in many cities and the most vocal were those, which is a good thing because lifespan has become long. You retire around 60, 65 and you live for another 20 years. Why not devote those years to your city and to your to social welfare? So it's a good thing. So if youth want to work in social area, they're most welcome and we should encourage them. But I think it would be too much to ask them कि भाई अपना काम छोड़ो और हमारे पास आ जाओ. That's a that's a tall order.
One last question. Yes, thank you.
Hello, sir. So my question was regarding the housing issue that is troubling Mumbaikars for like decades now. Mumbai has the highest price for real estate. Yes, it is still part of a country which is in the lower middle income bracket. 42 to 50% of the people live in slums. And so, what role can the BMC or the municipal corporation play to prevent a housing crisis, limit the prices, or can it regulate the rents? Can it regulate the real estate prices, or it will be too socialistic to think in that way? Like, what can the corporation do?
I was just around your question. I was encouraged to write something on a comparative estimate of New York and Mumbai in terms of some of the things. And one of the areas that comes in is housing. Now, housing is a municipal subject in New York. It's not a municipal subject in our country. All important things, the subject is with the state or with the government of India. So state, the police is with the state. In New York, it is with the city. Housing is with the state in our country. Housing is with New York. Transport is a state subject in our country. Transport is with New York. So these functions basically don't get performed because it's not a subject of the city. So what does the city do? However, when we did the plan of 2034, we took a number of 1 million affordable housing. And there is a provision for that. Land has been identified, the plan has been made, and it is there. Unfortunately, the lands are mostly private and no, steps have been taken towards implementing that. But if one wants to implement it, it's possible. Affordable housing is something that will only happen if government wants to do affordable housing. Now, the Prime Minister's housing scheme is doing quite well in smaller cities. In Mumbai also it is there, but the question is you have to find the land. How do you find that? But affordable housing is one of the largest problems that Mumbai and many large cities face. And unless that happens, the question of inclusivity that you are talking about, that is unanswered. But the city, again, since it's an economy, it is innately non-inclusive because economy is about, more. It's a moral and a human question, whereas the economy is a productivity and growth question. So cities will not look kindly towards inclusivity. It is an external force that has to step in and make the city inclusive. Only then it will happen.
Okay. I think we have more questions? Okay. Yeah, one last. Yeah. Yeah.
So first, sir, thanks to Sir for giving such an insightful session. Secondly, sir, on the ongoing days, we know that how the concept of sustainable development is being imposed on developing nations like India and other countries by somehow the global north or the west. But we know, as you mentioned, that rapid urbanization is still taking place in around 30% is still only urbanized. So how can we like how is what is the extent of this push and how is it feasible to implement real sustainable solutions and development, which seems very difficult when we try to implement on ground things. Like I come from a sustainability background, and when I study local demographics and development programs, it is we talk on paper, but it's very hard to push things on ground. So just wanted to know your view on this.
Yeah, in the current kind of a situation, it appears to you that it is very hard. Now, as far as Western nations pushing us towards sustainability, I think we should forget that because India is no longer a pushover. So I don't think we abide by things because others are telling us to do that. India is much too independent and strong for that. Uh, However, sustainability is something that is ingrained in the Indian culture, and sustainability is not that difficult. In the urban context, sustainability becomes difficult because, as Mr. Goenka was saying, if your carrying capacity goes beyond what you can carry, then you have a problem. But why should you come have that problem? That's what we are saying. The total urban land area in the country is around 3.5%. That is 35% of your problem of your population is living on 3.5% of your land. Make it 10%. What's the problem? Go into so many cities. You have 7,000 urban locations. Pick 500 out of them, develop them, and it would be easier to sustain them rather than push everyone into a few places. India is too large a population to be pushed into a dozen cities. That's what is currently happening because cities draw as I told you, the economic theory is such that it trends to agglomerate, and therefore people will go there where they have employment. People will go there where they have opportunities. You spread that, and you will find that cities become much more sustainable. So that's a formula that we need to accept and work on.
Okay, I think that's it from audience questions. I had one question for you, sir. Last question, because you're here and I just want to take that one last opportunity. You were also part of the MMRDA. I've always wondered, looking at Bombay, there are just so many agencies involved, right? Handling so many different sort of day-to-day functions. We call them parastatal agencies. Two questions over here. One, I mean, firstly, it's very complex to understand who's managing what, etc., which means accountability becomes an issue because you don't know if something goes wrong, who do I have to go to? It's simply not the corporation. I mean, there are roads under, like, different agencies, jurisdiction, etc. Accountability becomes an issue, and secondly, I also think that it's an it's some sort of an impingement to democratic legitimacy as well, because these bodies are, of course, I mean, they are like, experts, they are technocrats, they are technical people, etc. They've been carved out as special agencies for specific purposes, so they do not have a lot of citizen representation, barely any. So, just your thoughts on that, because you've been a part of an agency, one of the biggest in the cities, as well as a part of a corporation. So, how do you see this relationship pan out, and what are your thoughts on the existence of these multiple parastatal agencies working with local bodies?
It's a big last question. Anyway, this whole thing has come out of a report that was submitted by the Gadgil committee long time back. The Gadgil committee, for the first time, realized when it was given this task is that cities are small, but cities are also very large. And questions, as they graduate from small to medium to big and to metropolitan areas, the extent of questions and the complexity of questions change. And therefore, for that, you need to have three levels of urban administration and governance. And the parastatals, in terms of planning parastatals, comes at the top. So the MMRDA or such bodies have a role, but they have a planning role. They have a supervisory role of looking at the entire area and seeing what is it that impinges this entire area and needs to be properly distributed so that everyone has a share in it, like water or solid waste. How do we make a governance architecture that works for the entire area. So these have statutory basis and they are important. However, what has happened is that as the states have uh, tried to encroach on more and more of urban local functions, they have established parastatals. Now, parastatals, I fully agree with you, complicate the entire situation. In Mumbai now we have very many parastatals, but still Mumbai performs a huge number of functions. You go outside the state, in Bangalore, for instance, the water supply is with a different parastatal, transport is with a different parastatal. There is a lake agency which is a different parastatal. There are two or three planning parastatals, and the whole city is full of parastatals. So obviously the municipal space shrinks and the urban local body which was supposed to perform all these functions now performs barely a few of them. The constitutional interpretation of parastatals is that they, as if they are performing a specific function because it is a difficult function, they could do that as a department of the urban local body itself. Because the citizen then would be able to relate. It's not a problem of accountability there. The city is accountable. And if you ask the question of the city, it goes to that particular department. So the whole structure has come about because the state has been axing the municipal space and taking them over. So this is something which is not prescribed by the even the 74th constitutional amendment. For instance, urban planning, it's something which state does. Ultimately, every plan gets approved by the state. But the constitution says that urban planning is a municipal function. So essentially, the municipalities need to be a complete kind of a third tier. And everything else within the geographical limits of the city that gets done, if it is a specific kind of a question, it should work as a department of the municipal corporation and not outside it. Where is the role of parastatal? Parastatal's role comes in a totally barren area where you want to erect this new city. There is no local body. There you erect a parastatal which performs that function. Within the city, if you're doing it, then you're doing an injustice to the local body and you're complicating things for the citizens.
Thank you so much, sir. That was, I'm glad I asked that question. But I think that sort of concludes our discussion for today. I have personally learned a lot from this session, and I'll be in touch with you because I'd like to look at some of these papers and studies. We are very, very grateful that you joined us today, sir. You came all the way from Pune to join us here in
All my
Mumbai.
articles, if you want to read, they're all on Google
Yes,
Scholars.
yes, yes, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody else who joined us today for this event. It was a small gathering, but I'm hoping that it was an engaging discussion and you're taking back something from this. We will hopefully host another episode before the elections, the BMC and the other corporation elections in Jan, and we look forward to seeing you there as well. But please, can we have a round of applause for our guest speaker today? Thank you so much. Thank you. And so this is just a small token from us, like a plant and a coffee table book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks for coming.